everybody, welcome back to our Book of John Bible study. We are here in the last 2 days. This whole book has been leading up to this chapter, chapter 19. In chapter 19, Jesus, he's sentenced to death, and Pilate, he's this Roman governor, and he's struggling with what to do with this guy, Jesus. He's found him, he's interviewed Jesus, and he feels like there's no case, there's no conviction, there's no guilt in Jesus. But yet the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the scribes at the time, they had this mob of people on their side because it's the Passover time. It's the time when there are more people in the city of Jerusalem than any other time in the year. They've made their way to Passover. So Pilate, he's in this kind of conundrum, and he's risking really two different things. One, he's risking condemning an innocent man to death, and two, he's risking a riot in this very contentious part of the Roman Empire. And there's politics at play between who is leading this particular Roman territory. And there's rising tensions between the Jews and the Romans. This makes this really extra complicated. But Pilate, his job as the governor is to be able to keep order in this Jerusalem community. And so Pilate, he tries to find a middle ground. And so what he does is kind of horrific, really. He decides to have Jesus flogged. He has Jesus just beaten. And then the Roman soldiers who are beating Jesus, they also start mocking him. They create a crown of thorns and they throw a purple cape on him, trying to indicate that he is a king, the king of the Jews. So they start calling him and mocking him the King of the Jews. And then Pilate, he brings Jesus back out into the crowd to see if this beating is going to be sufficient to cure their bloodlust, to see if it's going to be sufficient just by beating Jesus instead of condemning him to death. As Pilate brings Jesus out, he says, "Look, I want you to know that I have no case against him. I don't think that he is a guilty man." But then the chief priests, they encourage everyone around them to start yelling, "Crucify him." But you see, Pilate doesn't know what to do. He's afraid of the possibility of a riot. So Pilate brings Jesus back in and he questions him some more, and he sits there and tries to decide what to do about it. And he's trying to sit there and figure out what the right choice is. Does he crucify an innocent man, or does he let a riot happen in the city of Jerusalem? But the Jews, they're sneaky. They are convinced and continuing in their politics. And so they look at Pilate and they say to Pilate, they said, "If you release this man, you're no friend of the emperor." There's like a political move that they're doing here. He says, everyone who claims to be a king, and Jesus never actually claimed to be a king. He claimed to be the Son of God. But he says, if anyone who claims to be a king themselves is against the emperor. And so now Pilate realizes that he is afraid and that he is stuck. He is stuck, and he takes Jesus outside to this place where they call the stone pavement. This stone pavement is a really interesting detail pointed out in the book of John because it actually indicates what's called the judgment seat. It's the place where people received their judgment when they were brought to trial. And it's interesting to note in the Bible, in the book of 2 Corinthians, we hear that Jesus is the one who now sits on the judgment seat. So when we hear that in Corinthians, it's coming back to this part here in the book of John. And this all happens where Jesus is getting judged and tried and beaten. It all happens on the day of preparation for the Passover. It's the first day of the Passover festival. And this is really significant for us because on the first day of the Passover festival, it's the time when an unblemished male lamb gets selected to have its as sacrifice so that it is slaughtered on that preparation day. So during the Exodus, hundreds and hundreds of years before that, for the Jews, they remember this during the Passover. During the Exodus, an unblemished male lamb was slaughtered and its blood was put on the doors so that when the angel of death came, the final plague in the Exodus, it actually passed over the houses that had the blood of the lamb on it. So the fact that John indicates this little detail, it being the first day of the Passover, the day of preparation, it's just to show us that Jesus is the new sacrificial lamb, this unblemished lamb who will be killed so that death will pass over all of us, really. So many beautiful layers in this book of John. And so Jesus, he's at this judgment seat and he's sentenced to crucifixion. And it's in John's gospel that Jesus actually carries his cross to his burial site, to the place of the skull. In the other three gospels, it talks about a Simon of Cyrene who has picked up the cross after Jesus has dropped it. And we're not saying that that's not true in the book of John, because that certainly could have happened. Jesus has just been flogged and beaten and humiliated. He has been through absolutely everything. So it's likely that he did collapse during this walk between Pilate's place, the judgment seat, and to the place where he would be crucified. It's also really interesting to know that it's probably only the horizontal beam of the cross that Jesus actually carried. They would have had the upright beams already at the crucifixion site outside of the city. So Jesus, he carries his own cross in the book of John, and he goes to the place of the skull where they crucified Jesus and two people on either side of him. And Pilate had above his head an inscription written, "The King of the Jews." This was really to mock the Jews further, to show them that he had ultimate power and authority over them. It really was a political act. And this gets under the Jews' skin. They say, hey, you know what? You should have said he's the King of the Jews, not the King of the Jews. But it's a little stab at the Jewish people there that Pilate has written on there. And as the soldiers, they are crucifying Jesus and they hang him up to die. They have his clothes and they play dice for them. And this is a really important detail for us because this fulfills what is written in Psalm 22 about what was to come. And as Jesus is hanging there on his cross, he sees his mom and his beloved disciple John there below. And he says to John, John, here is your mom, and Mom, Mary, here is your son. Even while hanging there in the worst death we could possibly imagine, Jesus is still taking care of the people that he loved. He's still taking care of others. Next, as Jesus is hanging there, he says the words, "I am thirsty." He does this in order to fulfill scripture also. And they pour sour wine on a hyssop branch, and then they pass it up to Jesus so he can take just a tiny little drink. Now the sour wine, here's the layers of this. The sour wine points all the way back in John to the first miracle that we hear that Jesus has done, where he turns water into wine at the wedding at Cana. And not just okay wine, but really, really good wine. So in the beginning, Jesus creates really, really good wine. And here at the very end of his life, he has sour wine. And the detail about hyssop, too, in this moment, that branch used to give him the wine, this is also important because it was during the Passover back in Exodus when they used a hyssop branch to spread the blood of the lamb. All these layers that the author John is putting into this narrative so we can really have our minds blown at what happened in the person of Jesus. And then finally, you have the seventh thing that Jesus said there on the cross. Jesus says, "It is finished." And I want to point something out real quick. Here in the book of John, we have 7 miracles. We have 7 last words of Jesus, and we have 7 of times where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. I am the resurrection and the life. All of this in the book of John. Is your mind completely blown yet? So Jesus is hanging there and he says, "It is finished." But the actual Greek word can be translated also into completed. Jesus has completed the work that he came to do as the Word made flesh that came to dwell among us. And as Jesus dies, the author John, he adds and writes in all these details that none of Jesus' bones are broken, again connecting back to that original Passover lamb in Exodus. And as Jesus is taken off the cross, Joseph of Arimathea, along with the help of Nicodemus, who we first heard about in John chapter 3, they take his body and they go place it into a garden tomb. A garden. Does that remind you of anything else? The Word that was in the beginning, that created the whole world and put humans in a garden. And now Jesus' body is also laid in a garden. Such a beautiful, sad story. And here's where you think that the story would end, that it would be over, that all this drama, all these layers, you'd think that it would just end in death, that it is finished, that it is completed. But good news for us, this isn't the last chapter of the book of John. It's not over. This death, it is not the end. As we here in church sometimes like to say, it's Friday, but Sunday is coming. So come back tomorrow and you can see what happens next. Here's my questions for you today. Number 1, what was new for you as you heard the story of Jesus' crucifixion today? And number 2, what was the most meaningful part of Jesus' journey to the cross for you? Thanks for joining us. We'll see you for the exciting conclusion tomorrow.